All right, so you're going to see my conversation with one of the greatest songwriters in pop music history, Paul Anka. I can't really believe I got the chance to talk to him. He's been there for everything, and he has an amazing way of telling stories. He has an amazing way of talking about like collecting Campbell's soup wrappers, and that led him to New York. That helped him get his first ever hit. Sort of convincing the Beatles that they should write and publish their own songs. He does an amazing job at telling the story of how he wrote My Way for Frank Sinatra in a thunderstorm at his typewriter. Just a joy to talk to Paul Anka. What a total pro. I hope you enjoy it.
Put your head on my shoulder, whisper in my ear, baby.
How are you? It's lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for the time.
Hey, Tom, thank you for that illustrious prefacing opening to what's going to be a fun conversation, I hope. Thank you.
I wondered whether you listen to those songs very often when I played them for you. I said, how often does he get to hear them?
Paul doesn't listen to those because Paul sings them every night when I'm on stage, and I have to, but I'm happy to, Tom. Actually, I don't retire songs, and the documentary was very cathartic in the sense that I started looking at all of those amazing days when I started trying to evaluate what was going on, you know. But those songs are very much obviously a part of my teenage life, of my experiences from observation and what I was feeling. So, you know, I enjoy singing them because, you know, I've just got back from South America, and, you know, I was in Mexico, stadium of 10,000 people. And if I didn't do those songs, they would have lynched me. They sing them like their national anthems, with a great deal of respect toward anthems. And there's a black hole, Tom, between, you know, when you're sitting in my studio like this and you're creating, and then you send out all of your creativity out into the world, you really don't know how you're affecting people. You don't know what it does for them. I only know that when I tour, when I'm on a stage and thousands of people in front of me and they react to the music. So that happens when I tour, and it's just gratifying for me to, you know, look back on life and see that I'm still doing what I love and that people are still showing up, and I can sing those songs along with a body of work that has culminated to where we are today. Whereas back then it was limited, Tom. I was doing 3 or 4 songs on stage with, you know, a bunch of young teenage guys who got very lucky as I did, and who were shifting culture and not knowing it in an industry that was in its infancy stage. So those songs are the roots for me. I can relate to them exactly as to what I was going through, what I was feeling at the time. And it all emanated out of Canada, you know, sitting in my basement in Ottawa because there was 20 feet of snow outside. I figured, well, I better write some songs. I'm not going out. But, you know, Canada was my foundation.
Oh, I find that so interesting because it wasn't like you came from like, you weren't like a Wayne or a Schuster. Like you weren't coming from this like tremendous showbiz family.
Right.
You were in Ottawa, you had a family in the restaurant business. When you say you were when you were looking back and trying to figure it out, talk to me a little bit about how you found your way into making music at all. Like just even around the house when you were a kid making music.
Great childhood, you know, Ottawa back then, couple 100,000 people maybe, good family, going to school, but realizing at some point I had this passion for music. And my dad worked, my mother worked, and, you know, she'd give me money along with my paper route money. I was earning, I don't know, $3 a week from the paper route. Then I worked at my dad's restaurant, peeling potatoes, etc. He wanted to start me out in the restaurant business, and that's another factor where I didn't want to do that. But I was singing, you know, and I was writing, and I was winning awards in school for recognition of some short stories that I wrote. And my dad had me go down to the Ottawa Citizen, and which I think may still be there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Along with loving music, writing and doing poems, taking music lessons, going to church, seeing this beautiful girl in front of me. His name was Diana, but 3 years older, which was a major factor in the 50s. It's not wide open today. Back then, if you were this or you were that, you were this, you know, you didn't qualify. So the short of it is, I wrote this song for this girl, Diana, based out of the fact that I started writing, and that became something very important to me. And I only got lucky when I went to New York and introduced that song, and it was all started from being, motivated in Ottawa.
I didn't see this in the documentary, but I had always heard a story that you went to New York partly because you won a Campbell's Soup contest. Is that right?
Yes, there was a big contest in the paper. Whoever collected the most soup wrappers in the Canadian district got to go to New York for 3 days. And I said, wow, that's where the music is. I got to get in there. So I went and took a job where the soup was. And I started packing all the groceries, and I'd clock the women that were buying Campbell's soup. And I'd go to their house after work, and I'd say, can I have the wrappers? And I'd sign my name and stick it in the box. Anyway, fade out, fade in. I won for my district in Ottawa, and about 40 kids from across Canada were put on a train and taken to New York. So there I was in New York at the YMCA, looking at this tower of cement and lights, which I'd never seen in my life. And I got a real good fix on what I wanted to do and how I wanted to get back. And that's how I got to New York.
What I can't get over is, I mean, there weren't any other 14, 15-year-olds in Ottawa, I'm guessing, that had this kind of drive, the drive to, I want to get up in front of Don Costa, ABC Records. I want to sing Diana. I want to see if I can make something of myself. Like, what kind of 15-year-old were you that you even wanted to do all that? Like, where was that coming from?
Kind of lived with that in and out of my career and life. When I reflect at East Junction, how the hell did I get here? And I look back how I started. There was some kind of a drive that I had and a passion for music. It just manifested itself to where I was dedicated to it every day. I mean, I wanted to, sing in the church choir. I wanted to sing at school. I wanted to write, and it never wavered. I was influenced by the black music has driven cultures for years, and I was really into Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and the doo-wop music, and I had a group called the Bobby Soxers, and every day from as far back as I can remember, I wanted to sing, and then I wanted to write. When I found that I had a wherewithal with writing stories and poems, that's all I wanted to do. I mean, it was on my mind every day. I just was very tenacious about it. I think the turning point for me occurred, which a lot of people may not know. I left when I was 14 and went to LA to visit an uncle.
You made some recordings down there, right?
Correct. I only made one record. There was an ex Governor General, John Buchan, wrote a book called Prester John that I had to read when I went back to school in the fall when I came home from my uncle's. There was a city in there called Blau Wild de Biesfontein. It's an actual village that exists today. And I was fascinated with the title that I said, I'm going to write a song, my first song about this city in Africa. And I wrote this song called Blau Wild de Biesfontein, where love is so splendor and no one will surrender. A moonlit night and a magic night on a dreamer's holiday. And I had this song, and it was my first song. And when I came to LA, I was with my uncle, and I used to go to Wallach Music City. It was the record store, but back then with vinyl, you walked in a booth and you had a booth to yourself and you could listen to records all day. So I started listening to this record that was the #1 record in the country at the time, called Stranded in the Jungle by the Cadets. And I was fascinated with the song and the group. And I would look at this red label and it said Modern Records, Culver City. And Culver City was about 50 minutes from my uncle's. I hitchhiked out to Culver City and I walked in the office of this Modern Records. It wasn't an office building. It was like a one-story garage with a room in front. And when I walked in, there were these two brothers, the Bahari brothers and their sister, just sitting there kind of hanging, And I went in, I had my jeans on, my T-shirt, and they thought I was delivering something. I said, no, I'm here to sing my song. I love that group, the Cadets. And they said, what song? I said, Blah Wild to Be Spontaneous. I mean, can you imagine of all the songs I could have mentioned? So of course they were intrigued because they thought I was nuts. And I sing the song, and they said, "You know what? We like it. We want to record you. You got something." I said, "Really?" So I came back a week later, and I go in the garage in the back where the studio was. And they had an arranger, and in walk the Cadets, the four guys that had the #1 record in the country, singing background of Blah Wild to Be Spontaneous, and the other side called I Confess. Well, there I was trying to fathom the fact that I just recorded something. I got my first record. Well, back to your question, that was the kickoff for me that I could do it. Now, obviously, I go home, my relatives, a couple of stations in Ottawa played it, but I was a failure at 14 years old. No one else bought the record. But it all started from there and gave me the inspiration to keep going till I got to Diana.
The story is that Diana becomes a massive #1 hit. They fly your parents to New York to sign some papers and give their permission because you were too young. And your dad, who I can tell was a shrewd, and what I mean by that is smart, level-headed man. He gives you a Bible, he gives you a kiss and a hug, and he says, "Go, but be careful who you trust." Were there moments in your career where you heard your dad's advice in your head?
All the time. You don't know till you're in the game and on the field in an industry that's unlike any other industry, especially that industry, which was in its infancy stage in terms of, how it was changing. And I learned very quickly that, people would come into your life only because of what you were and what the need was they had from you as opposed to knowing you.
Yeah, how much money you could make them or that kind of thing too.
Yeah,
right?
so I learned the hard way that I couldn't trust everyone. And I say to this day, with some optimism, knowing that we're in great change of the world, everyone should be very careful as to who they trust in their life, because the human factor, unfortunately, rears its ugly head every now and then. But listen, you navigate through it. You learn the hard way, and you do the best you can with the cards on the table. And I have really nothing to bitch about. I've had a good life.
I mean, shortly after Diana blows up, you are this kid. I mean, what strikes me about the whole documentary is just how young you are in every stage of this world. And you're young. You're barely 20. You play the Copa Cabana. The Copa Cabana in that era? Can you give me some idea or give us some idea of what it felt like to stand on stage? Like, I know famously it didn't have a dressing room. You had to go through the kitchen, right? You would have to walk through the kitchen and then you get up on stage. I mean, that's where Sinatra was playing. I mean, I first knew about it from Goodfellas, like, can you give me an idea of what it was like to stand on stage and play there, especially when you were just a kid?
In those days, music business and the nightclub business, you worked for the mafia, the boys, whatever you want to call it. And I knew going in that I was going to work for these guys, and I was fascinated, like people always have been fascinated. But I've realized that into my second, third year that my voice was going to change. I didn't know that I was going to last because I was told a lot of people didn't last. So I leaned on my writing career because I figured if this doesn't work, I'll have the gravitas of being a writer, give songs away. But along with that, I would sit with Frankie Avalon and Bobby Darin, and we'd say, hey, this may be over. What are we going to do? And we looked up to these guys, the Rat Pack, Sammy Davis, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra. That was it in the business. There's no Beatles. There's no Hendrix. Nothing had changed. It was Las Vegas nightclubs. We had to make a determination that we would learn our craft to become entertainers and craft the material around what was indigenous to performing for the boys at the Copa, the Fontainebleau, and Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, to go from 2 songs a night on a bus with a bunch of teenagers to being fitted for a tuxedo, a bow tie, which I never wore in my life or knew what it was, or knew how to tie it, I now started learning to deliver and be aware of other songs that I had to do to make myself appealing to that audience that normally didn't come to those other concerts. I was scared to death. I had a lot of confidence and I worked hard at it. But till you walked on the floor of the Copa, that was ostensibly a basement, there was nothing glamorous about it. It had 2 tiers to the left and to the right, and you were on a floor, the band was on the floor, but it was the Copa with all kinds of, it was an eclectic group of people that you worked for, and you knew that most of the time you were working to the boys and their girlfriends or their wives. So it was challenging, it was frightening, it was something that I focused on so hard because I knew it would help me if I wanted to have some longevity. So between Vegas and the Copa, changing my whole appearance in terms of what I wore, changing the content of the songs, changing to the size of an orchestra, and knowing that I'm singing now to a room of, let's say, 800 people, as opposed to 3,000 screaming kids in a stadium for 2 songs. But the experience I had working around the Rat Pack and those guys that I looked up to and with those people was something that I'll always remember. I'll never forget the roots of how I started.
I love that they took you in. I love that, because you would have think that Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., these guys, they were so on top of the world. You would think that they would be so resistant to anyone coming into their circle, and they were actually kind of famously, and much less this kid, much less this Canadian kid. But it sounds like. Can you tell me a little bit about them, like off stage? Like they seem to take you in and welcome you.
Great point you brought up. You have to understand when you're working back then for the boys, and it's one unit from New York to there. By the time I got to the Sands, I knew what I was doing on stage. I was making money for the boys. We were all making money for the boys. So it wasn't that they were my bosses. They were just guys that were in my industry who worked for the same people, and we were making money for them. So here I am, doing 6 weeks in a row in Las Vegas, making money for the boys, still having hit records, and hanging out with these guys, ostensibly twice my age, and trying to have a great deal of respect for them because I realized I had to keep my nose clean and I had to behave myself because these were the guys. So, you know, after a show, invariably, there we all were together in this small little steam room spa in the back of the hotel, running around nude and with towels. Now, it jolted me, not them, because they knew each other, but I'm looking at my idols running around bare naked, and I'm going, man. And as I told everybody, talk about having trouble with eye contact, right? So it was all of that camaraderie that existed in that small group. There was nothing happening. You know, we had 3 or 4 channels for television. There was limited radio stations. As I said, no media-driven society, and that was it. You worked for the boys, and these guys embraced me and brought me in because I was making money for them, and they felt that I was talented enough, and mainly because of my writing, frankly. You know, I don't think that if I was not the writer, I don't know that we'd even be talking today, frankly.
I want to point out for people listening that it was incredibly uncommon back then for anyone to be singing the music that they were writing.
Yes.
You go back and say that, like, hey, writing gave me security, and I started writing songs for other people. You wrote, right in that moment, one of my favorite songs of all time, which is "It Doesn't Matter Anymore," that Buddy Holly recorded. I got a little goosebump here just thinking about it. I just adore that song. I love it harmonically. I love that big 3/7 in the end of the bridge. I just love it. And I know a lot about it. I know that Buddy Holly he said he was getting fleeced by his manager. He said he was tired of having that sort of crickets, rockabilly sound. You had worked with strings. He wanted you to write something with strings. So you write the song. You briefly touched on this in the documentary, and I haven't heard you talk about it except to say that you were there. You were there when Buddy Holly recorded "It Doesn't Matter Anymore." And this was shortly before he died so tragically. What do you remember?
We were very, very dear friends. We were going to start a music company together.
Yeah.
We went through the evolution from a bad situation he had to coming to New York, getting married, wanting to change his image. and saying to me at some point and teaching me chords on the guitar, I want you to write something. I want something big like you do. You Are My Destiny, strings, all of that. I said, great. I came back with It Doesn't Matter Anymore. We went to New York. We sat with, I think his name was Jacobs, the arranger, worked it out conceptually, and came up with just something that was different than Buddy had ever done, as you pointed out. Now, in the interim periods, he was in New York, happily married. He was taking flying lessons, which a lot of people don't know, out in New Jersey. He needed money. And the Feld family, Irving Feld, who had drugstores in Washington, was the promoter of all these tours. And he was promoting tours for Buddy and I and everyone that was on the tour. And I went to him and I said, Buddy needs to make some money, Irv, because they were my partners. And the Feld brothers put together a tour for Buddy, Big Bopper, I think Waylon Jennings,
Richie Valens,
Richie, et cetera. Yeah. So we finished the record. It comes out, it charts, they start on the tour. We had all, prior to that, talked on all our tours of renting a plane because we had to get off these terrible buses, which were so unlike any bus today. There were no bathrooms, they were freezing, they were just inadequate.
Yeah, they were almost more like school buses than anything else.
They were terrible, terrible.
Yeah.
And it was, let's get a plane, let's get a plane. So we were all kind of on that vibe to do it. Now, Buddy with the private lessons out in Jersey, wanting to get laundry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However that occurred, talked this guy to take off in weather that he shouldn't have taken off in. And when we all got the news the next day, indeed, that's the day the music died.
Where were you when you, you didn't tell that story in the documentary either. I've never heard you talk about it. Where were you when you found out that the plane had gone down?
I was in New York when that happened. Yeah. And, I gave some of those royalties of that record to his family back then because it was just so destabilizing for all of them. For my money, back then, he was probably more talented than all of us, frankly.
Yeah.
And he influenced so many people, including the next wave that would hit the US, the British invasion. Because when I was over there as a kid, they only had domestic artists singing and covering American songs. And Buddy, along with Chuck Berry and Fats Domino, influenced all those art. When I met the Beatles, when I was working in Paris, they were a cover band. I went to the Olympia Theater to see my friend who was headlining. And on the bill at the Olympia Theater was this group from England called the Beatles. And I didn't know who they were. And I was sitting there waiting for my friend to come on. And these four guys came out with the hair and the thing and the look of them. And I went, wow. And they were doing cover songs. I got to know them. We took pictures. We met. I met them in London. We got together and I kept emphasizing because they would say to me, we want to write. We want to publish and produce like you're doing. And I said, guys, it's the only thing. You got to start writing because they weren't writers. And I would go back to New York with their records because we're not in a media-driven society and nobody knew what was going on the other side of the pond at all. Everything was late. News was late. And I'd bring records back and play them for my agents, Normie Weiss and Sid Bernstein. And I said, you got to see this group, these Beatles. And, they look at me and go, what Beatles? I said, this group, they're amazing. And I kept pounding them. And I think somewhere in all of that, they went over and met with Brian Epstein, and they kind of respected what I was saying. And you know the rest of the story. They brought him over in '64, and that opened up and changed the music business from what was a small business to a huge business when the Beatles arrived and landed on the shores of the U.S., influenced by Buddy Holly and other American artists.
Did you watch them on Ed Sullivan the night they first played?
Yeah, these were guys I knew. These were guys when I go to England to hang out with. All of a sudden, they're here. And, I felt that whole wave happening. And I was so happy to be a kind of a part of being there in the beginning when they were a cover band and knowing them. And now coming over and changing our industry. They literally, we weren't accepted by Madison Avenue. Adults didn't like us. It was just our fans. When they came, the doors opened, and all of a sudden, wow, it grew into business.
But the doors also kind of closed. I mean, one of the things that comes out in this documentary that I hadn't thought of is when the British invasion happened and the Beatles, who were more influenced by skiffle and a little bit more like even like classic songcraft would do, Till There Was You, you know, and these old songs. But then the Stones and then the Zombies and, you know, the British invasion really starts happening. It's pretty clear in the documentary that like you have to start thinking, hey, the Paul Anka sound as it is not really in anymore. I got to think about pivoting. I mean, that's a lot of artists went away then. Like a lot of artists went away then. Talk to me what you were feeling in that moment.
Liking the change, because all of a sudden we were unilaterally accepted to a lot of people. Realizing that I had a few really good years and that it fortified the fact that I've got to really stretch out with my writing. You know, that's why I did The Tonight Show, The Longest Day, stay the writer, and start recording in other languages. You know, I had already, before the Beatles, been to all these major countries. And I was fascinated and taken with all the cultures. And when the Beatles hit, it wasn't that we didn't get played. We just were limited in the amount of play that we got.
Was that hard? Was that hard, Paul? Was that a hard pill to swallow? Like that, hey, you know, I'm on top, and then, hey, all of a sudden there's this other sound that I'm not a part of, you know?
It wasn't, because when you're that young and you have the confidence by the time they hit that you're playing Vegas, that you're still traveling all over the world, that people are still recognizing you, you just have to be focused to try to stay relevant and keep the career going. So I wasn't really banged up over it, where even though I saw a lot of my friends out of the business, they weren't writers. They didn't have the career that I had. The key for me was I was working and I was successful. I was still headlining in Vegas. I was still doing the Copa, and the Beatles were there. And in my mind, I was growing up. I knew they'd never be playing there. And I was traveling to these countries, recording in different languages, which really gave me a great deal of satisfaction. I was, you know, when I recorded in Italian, my song Ogni Volta was the first million seller ever in the history to that point in Italy. I went to Germany, I went to France, I recorded in Spain. So I've had a career, and I was grateful for the career, and I was grateful for the fact that I was growing, my voice was changing, and I was still writing. So no, I wasn't devastated that they came along. I was happy that it evolved into that, because it really opened the industry up. It wasn't the problem, even though there were concerns, but I was cool with it. I mean, my record company gave up on me, and I bought all my masters back. I was the first to, you know, I took savings and I gave them $250,000, and I bought all my rights back. And I said, well, I still believe and you don't. And I bought them, and I've owned them ever since, because I just believed that I had to keep going. And I started a company with RCA, and it worked out very well.
I mean, what's interesting is that there's like all these stories kind of lead together in a really interesting way in your career. Like you mentioned, like, okay, so I end up playing with Buddy Holly. You know, Buddy Holly, I'm part of the Buddy Holly world. The Beatles sing Buddy Holly songs. I get to know them. I start encouraging them to write. The Beatles come over. I have to sort of make some changes. I end up going to Europe. I end up going around the world actually and singing in other languages. And it strikes me that, you know what I mean? Like we're on the same path. And it strikes me because you were in France, because you heard a song in French, that everything changes after that.
It was spending time over there. I'd gotten married to my wife, Anne, may she rest. And I spent all my vacations over in France, south of France, you know, sometimes in Italy. Now, I'm a music guy. You know, I'm living and breathing music. And not unlike off-point rock swings, where I heard a bunch of rock songs that I felt could swing and took that shot. So you hear things as a musician differently. Anyway, I'm sitting in this garden south of France. I have the radio on, and I hear this song. And I go, that melody's interesting, but it's not really kicking in for me. And it was a typical French, well-crafted song. I mean, it was about a marriage breaking up, a relationship, you know, that your armpit starts to smell the same, and you're dressed, and I love you as usual, whatever. It was very graphic. as beautiful as they can write that stuff. So I go back to Paris on my way home, and this song's in my head. And I find out, because it was still a small industry, who had the rights. And I call them up. I knew them. I knew this guy, Eddie Barclay. I said, we're buddies. They were, France was like my second home, and these guys were friends of mine. So I said to him, I said, you know that song? He said, yes. I said, give it to me. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't buying the pyramids here. This was just a song. Some would assume I had to pay a lot of money. I didn't pay anything. It took 20 minutes. He gave me 2 pages that I owned it outside France to do whatever I wanted, sign, over and done. And that's the way it worked. So I come home with it. It was still a domestic. It did fairly well. And I've got it and I put it in a drawer. Then I take it and I start playing it on the piano through the years, just living with it, going back with, okay. Sinatra had teased me for years to write him something. And I wasn't up to it. I was too young. I was intimidated. And I knew he hated rock and roll music, and I didn't know that he was thrilled with me. Puppy Love and Lonely Boy was not exactly fair for him, So I'm in Miami Beach at the Fontainebleau, which was one of the stops, Copa, Vegas, Fontainebleau. He comes to town to do a movie, late 60s. He calls me up. He says, kid, I'm here, I'm doing a movie. Let's have dinner. And I got to tell you something. I finished my show, meet him. He's sitting there with his wife then, 21-year-old Mia Farrow. And he's always as gracious as he's always been, and just a great human being for me. And in the course of the meal, he says to me, I'm quitting show business. I'm tired. The Rat Pack is over. And you could see he was fragile. And he said, but I'm going to do one more album with Don Costa. Now, Don Costa was the guy that found me. He's one of those backstory heroes. Without those guys, I'm nothing, and a lot of singers are nothing. And I introduced him to Sinatra way back, and one of the best albums Sinatra's ever done is called Sinatra and Strings with Don Costa. So I used Costa through my career, introduced him to Mr. Sinatra, and he said, I'm doing one more album and that's it. I'm done. Well, that hits you hard because there was nobody like, and there'll never be anybody like Frank Sinatra. I said, quitting? One more album? Jesus, I'll never get to write him a song. And I go back to New York. I'm sitting in my apartment. It's 12 midnight, huge thunderstorm outside. I can tell you right now, I remember that entire image that I was living. And I was sitting there at my typewriter because I typed 70 words a minute, taking that journalist course. And I'm going, that's that melody. And I played it on the piano, go back to my typewriter, and I'm going metaphorically. And now the end is near, and so on. And I start writing it as if Frank Sinatra were writing it. I'm saying things like, ate it up, spit it out, jargon, stuff that he
took the blows and all that. Yeah.
All that stuff that he would say. And I finished this thing in 5 hours. I don't know where it came from. Something's going on in the universe. I believe even more in it today. We're all here connected. Something happened spiritually, because I can't tell you how the hell I wrote it. I call him up. He said, bring it out. I fly to Vegas. I'm in his dressing room the next day. I sing it. He was still Frank Sinatra. They all wear the, not jumping up and down, but I like it, gonna do it, Anyway, 2 months later, I get a phone call. Record studio in Los Angeles, Frank Sinatra calling. I'm in New York. Takes the phone. He puts it next to a speaker. I hear My Way over the phone for the first time while I'm sitting in New York City crying. The song was such a hit for him that he stayed 10 more years.
Crying why, Paul? Why crying? Why did you feel that?
I was emotionally so moved. I had never felt the creative process that had culminated in something like that ever in my career. And the words, even though I was 24, the words and the meaning and everything that went into it had such an impact. Maybe The Longest Day came in the same arena, but nothing like My Way that I knew my life was going to change. It was something. Frank Sinatra doing one of my songs. Wow.
You mentioned you're still touring, you're still singing the song.
Yeah.
You sang it on Jimmy Kimmel the other night. You wrote it when you were
Yeah.
24, 25 years old. That was more than 50 years ago. You're now in your 80s.
Yeah.
Is there a line in that song that hits you differently now than it did back when you wrote it?
Good question. I will say, framing my answer, the way that I sing it and the emotion and what I get out of it in the last 10 years was very different than the way I used to sing it. It has so much more meaning. When I get to the line, and through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. When I get to I took the blows, those are very poignant for me because, as much as the glamour looks great to those on the outside, it's not easy because we've all had our challenges. And I dealt from motivating stages of my life of revenge. And if people are really honest, and especially artists, so many of us feel revenge from something that's happened to us in our life, especially trauma in our childhood. But revenge of something that's happened or someone that's done someone is such an amazing dynamic when it motivates you into the next stage of success, stability, etc. It's unreal how many times I felt revenge. It's like, I gotta get even. And I would love my fellow artists to step forward because I know they feel the same way. And I know anybody in any occupation that's felt it knows how meaningful revenge is. And it was to me. But, 84 years, I don't hold anything inside. I'm looking back at a career that's just been so good to me that I'm watching this circle of life and hoping for the best.
Let's stay on looking back a little bit. On your new album, I noticed you did a version of It Was a Very Good Year, which was a song I think originally made famous by the Kingston Trio, and then Frank Sinatra did it, I think, in 1961.
Erwin Drake was a friend of mine, and he wrote it for the Kingston Trio, folk song.
Oh, yeah. A song about looking back, a song about the stages of your life changing. When I was 17, it was a very good year, Can you tell me when you first heard that song and why you decided to record it on this record at this stage?
Well, I heard it years ago, but knew the song. And being a songwriter, you're constantly looking for material and admiring material. And I loved it when it came out, and I knew Erwin Drake. He wrote another great song, that Father of Girls. But anyway, I always liked the song. When it evolved with Sinatra, who we always watched to see what he was going to do next, I said, wow, look what he did with that. And I think it was Gordon Jenkins and Nelson Riddle, I'm not sure. And look how the interludes worked.
Yeah, they did the arrangement. They did the orchestration, yeah.
And look at how it came to life. I said, one day when I'm old enough, I'm going to do that song. So it was always in my pocket. And when it came down to the concept of this with the other songs, I said, that's it. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to do that song that I've always admired, and especially the Sinatra recording.
Paul, it's a great honor, and I don't say this stuff lightly. It's a great honor to meet you. And I think on behalf of Canada, maybe I can say that we're awful proud of you to be Canadian as well. Congratulations on the album and on the documentary, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for your time, and hello, Canada. Love you. See you soon.